This is Sheila with my second episode for SheVersion. Today I'm going to be talking about learning. It's my favorite thing to do. I love to learn, which is ironic now that I have traumatic brain injury. I can't seem to learn something and be able to retain that information from one day to the next. I can get muscle memory, but it's usually something that I did before the accident, and by doing it repeatedly, I can end up being able to remember certain things. But otherwise, every single day, I have to relearn something that I'm trying to learn new since the accident. It's really demoralizing. I'm hoping that that doesn't stay that way, but considering it's going on 3 years this November, it's probably going to stay that way. But thankfully, I've always loved to learn a lot of things my entire life, and so I have still a lot available to me from before the accident. I try not to let it frustrate me too much, but there are days where it makes me mad. It makes me really mad because when I learn, there's just this, it's like a runner's high that I get. It takes a lot of effort. Even before the accident, can't be lazy and learn something new. You have to be willing to get in there and work hard. It feels like an uphill battle, but once I finally get to that point and I've learned a new skill, it's so great. So it is something that I long to pass on to my children. It's part of the reason why I homeschool. It's because public school has a way of sapping the joy out of learning something new. And with homeschooling, we just get to have a great time while we learn new things. So, speaking of my situation, I'm still having to use my notes to be able to go through my subject. The way that I learn something new is usually by grabbing a book or looking it up on the internet and YouTube. I'm very careful about all of my sources of information. I don't assume all of them are correct. I go by the principle that I learned in the Bible, by 2 or 3 witnesses. You'll know if a certain thing is true. I still hold all of that loosely because you can find 2 or 3 witnesses that say absolutely ludicrous things. So I try to find things from different angles, depending on how important the subject is that I'm learning. If it's just a recipe, I'll try a recipe out with no problem. But I usually, with recipes, do it my own way anyway. But if it's something like life-changing, like how I'm going to parent my children, I research a lot of different angles to these to these big, hard-hitting subjects. So there is something very interesting about people that I've learned over the years, and that we are very prideful. We have it's a very weird tendency. It's something that we just do without thinking, but we are prideful about the stupidest things at times. And one of those things is about our intelligence level. It doesn't matter what group you associate yourself with. There's a ton of pride to be had when it comes to how you view yourself and what you know and what you don't know. And it's very weird to me. We are all good at things and all bad at things. There are just different things that we're really good at, and there's other things that we're really bad at, and that's normal. But for someone to identify themselves with what they know or what they don't know, I find strange. You don't know it right now, but you could learn it and be able to do it. Or you might know it really well, but you still probably have a ton to learn. I don't think I know one subject where you can be like, oh, I made it and I never have to learn anything new again. That you are learning from even before you're born until the day you die. I hope, I feel like it's a really sad thing, when there's people who just do not want to learn anything new. In my mind, I see that as the beginning of death. That's when you've stopped living and you're not moving forward or advancing in any way. So I grew up in the country. Now I live in the city. I've gone to college. I've hung out with rednecks out in the field, around bonfires, drinking beers. I've been around a lot of different groups of people, including international students. And in all of the groups that I've ever been in, there's been formulas. This is another thing that I love about learning, is that there's usually some sort of pattern or formula to things. And so I look for patterns in real life. And one of the patterns that I've noticed is that we identify ourselves with the things that we don't know. So like if you don't have any desire to advance your education, you lean into that. You get your own, well, everybody gets their own language. You have the academic language, and you have the street or the country language. You have your own grammar and your terminologies that you get, and it helps to identify you with this group. And so like out in the country, they will be very knowledgeable about a lot of different subjects. So like jack of all trades. They can take a tractor apart and put it back together. They can fix your vehicle on the side of the road. They understand livestock and the crops and the soils. They are very intelligent, and their knowledge is very necessary. And so they identify with the jack of all trades, master of none kind of idea. But when it comes to that book learning, that it's not necessary. It's not necessary for them to live their lives. And then on the streets, they got their language. Their life is hard. So education is not necessarily up on the top of their to-do list because they're just trying to survive. And it kind of becomes an identity for them too, where what good is their education going to be for them? Because, how's it going to help? And they end up getting, I've seen many be just really prideful about the fact that they didn't need it. And then, so in the academic world, this is weird too. They're very knowledgeable, very book learned, but they specialize in a certain area and they fixate on that. And it's very normal for them to have no social skills whatsoever, no ability to be able to deal with everyday life situations, and they need someone constantly to take care of them. But they identify with being academic, and it's not their job to do these other things. And so they just stay cloistered in their little area and they just stay there. And they don't think, oh, I can learn in this area, and then I can also learn in this area too. I can learn how to take care of myself and my vehicle, and I can learn how to have good social skills and be able to communicate effectively with other people without taking them off all the time. Religious groups, religious people have a tendency to be very theology oriented, Bible oriented. They get fixated in that, and they're of just, head knowledge, or very spiritual and experiential, like, oh, I'm so close to God, and they are in touch with their spirituality. Then this world is passing away, so what's the point of me learning anything new or developing myself or stretching myself to learn skills for living in this world that God has created? And so they are so heavenly minded, they're of no earthly good. I don't know one group or one demographic that you can point to and be like, oh yeah, no, they're very well balanced. We're not balanced as a people. We are very unbalanced, and our pride is a major issue. So I don't want you to think for a second that I haven't looked at myself hardcore. I've, over the years, made it a regular habit to figure out or to try to pinpoint areas where I'm fixated or prideful. So this is not meant to be a critique on everybody and make everyone mad at me and make me and for you guys to think that I think I'm better than everyone else. No. No. The Lord knows that I have been humbled many, many, many times over the years. It's just part of my world. That's what I do. So I think this comes down to a mindset. It comes down to the fact that when you don't want to learn in an area, you're comfortable with your level of ignorance. You're getting by in life. Things are fine. I shouldn't have to pay attention to this because it's not broke. Don't fix it, when actually it might actually be broken, but you're just used to limping it along, People who are willing to learn and question, can I do this better? Do I have any blind spots in my life where I'm just putting up with what I know and understand? They have a tendency to be willing to seek understanding, to dive deeper, to do the hard work, and realize that learning is a tool, something that is meant to help them. Not meant to be a punishment or to torture them, but it is a really powerful tool to bring you joy and peace in your life. God has called us to a higher standard. We are made in His image, so we should pursue being in that image. God is not dumb. He's created a very magnificent world, and it's very complex. It's amazing. It's beautiful. Life here on this earth is absolutely fascinating. Hence the reason why I had a really hard time deciding on what area of science that I was going to focus in on. I decided to go with rocks because it was foundation of the earth, and the earth itself is fascinating to me. So I wanted to learn about deep in the earth with volcanoes and marine geology, earthquakes, and the movement of water in the earth and how these crystals were formed. I just had a lot of questions, and so I figured I'd start here and then work my way up. Since God's not dumb and we're not supposed to be dumb, being dumb should be painful. There's natural consequences to being stupid, and it should hurt. When you do something stupid and your hands get slapped by natural consequences, or the back of your head slapped by natural consequences, and be like, don't do that again. It's the natural reaction that we should have, to where we're like, oh, ow, that's painful. I really should not have done that. But quite often I have found that it's not enough of a deterrent for some people. They just keep making the same decisions over and over and over again, and I don't get it. It looks painful, so stop. Just please stop. When I was younger and I first started reading the Bible for myself, I started in Proverbs at one point because I had heard a pastor say that Proverbs was a book of wisdom. And I had previously just discovered how books can keep me from having to learn through the school of hard knocks how to do something. And I was fascinated by books. I was like, oh, what else could I learn? And I was like, wait, there's a book in the Bible that's all about wisdom? Oh, I want to read that and save myself some pain in the future. It's kind of what my thought was. And so the first chapter of Proverbs, the seventh verse, this fascinated me, and it took me years to really, and I'm still delving into it, but to truly plumb the depths of this verse has been fascinating to me. But it says, so Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. Ignorant fools despise wisdom and discipline. Yeah, that's true. It's very, very true. And then later in the chapter, we see wisdom calling out. Wisdom, verse 20 of chapter 1 says, wisdom shouts in the street. She gives forth her voice in the square, and at the head of the noisy street she calls out. At the entrance of the gate in the city she utters her sayings. How long, O simple ones, will you love simplicity? And the scoffers delight in scoffing, and fools hate knowledge. Turn to my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you. Because I called and you refused, I stretched out my hand and no one paid attention, and you neglected all my counsel, and were not willing to accept my reproof. I will also laugh at your disaster. I will mock when your dread comes. When your dread comes like a storm, and your disaster comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call on me, but I will not answer. They will seek me earnestly, but they will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of Yahweh. They were not willing to accept my counsel. They spurned all my reproof. So they will eat the fruit of their way and be satisfied with their own devices, for the turning away of the simple will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. But he who listens to me shall dwell securely and will be at ease from the dread of evil. That was a very powerful chapter for me, because that's what I was seeking. I was wanting to make sure that I wasn't going to be in pain for the rest of my life doing things that was stupid. And when I read that, I was like, oh, okay, got my attention. I'm paying attention very closely right now, because I don't like pain at all. I hate it. So anyway, so Proverbs helped me to realize that books were supposed to help me not be stupid, and that I didn't want to be mocked by wisdom. I didn't want to have the world looking on, watching me make one blunder after another and just be completely embarrassed. And especially if I could just read a book and learn something new that would keep me from making those mistakes. I was like, oh, this is not hard. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. It might be hard. It is hard, because you have to discipline yourself to learn something new. But it's not overly complicated, and you can do it. It just takes effort and time. So my dad taught me one of the most important lessons of my entire life whenever I was little. This lesson actually kept me from making some really poor choices. Like early on, it kept me from sleeping around and doing drugs. It was a very powerful lesson. He told me, watch people. If you like how they live, do what they do. If you don't like how they live, then don't do what they do. It's very simplistic, but when I was a kid, man, it was so powerful, and it's still powerful. Honestly, I've told this to other adults who are struggling in their life with decisions, and I was like, listen, my dad gave me this advice, and I would tell them this, and they would be like, oh, yeah. It's practical knowledge and understanding that is very helpful. When my dad told me that information, that little cutesy kind of saying, if you watch people and like with how they live, do what they do. If you don't like how they live, don't do what they do. It made me realize that there were things for me to learn that could help me with making decisions and choices. And it made me take a longer look at my decisions as I was growing up. Is this going to result in something that was going to be painful for me later? Is this the best decision that I could be making on this subject? So now I'm an adult, and I have escaped many devastating decisions that would have brought about consequences that would have followed me for the rest of my life. And I am eternally grateful to God and to my dad for the guidance in God's word and the guidance of my father, that my mother too. I'm not going to exclude her. There's, grandparents and aunts and uncles, and there's plenty of people in my life that I was able to turn to and get some good understanding of what a good decision would look like in this situation. But now that I'm an adult and I'm looking back and I'm raising my own children and I'm homeschooling them, I went through the process of figuring out, well, how do we learn? What's the best way to learn? How do we learn as humans? And I ended up coming up to a form of homeschooling called classical education. I knew the public school hadn't really prepared me for life. It didn't give me all the information I needed and how to live well. But when I found classical education, all of a sudden, I was painfully aware of how dumb I am. And it was really humbling. Oh, man. It was really humbling. Well, part of my entrance into classical education was reading some books, and I learned about the model that they use. And I believe that most education in America does follow some form of this model. But essentially what you do is when you take the youngest grades, and when they're little, they're really great at memorizing everything. They'll memorize and repeat everything, like parrots. Like some people call it the parrot stage. Others call it grammar level, and it's interchangeable. But they're essentially repeating everything. And so you start putting knowledge in their head that they're repeating. They can memorize the multiplication table. You call it skip counting. They can memorize geography, and they can memorize the anatomy and other things like that. They don't know what they're necessarily talking about, but they have the grammar memorized. And you showed them pictures of what they're talking about, and they're like, oh, that's so cool, and they move on. And then they get into what is known as the dialectic stage, where they are starting to ask why 1,000,000 times every single day. Why? And you start answering those questions. In grammar stage, are putting pegs in their brains of just random information. They don't know what it is. They don't need to know what it is. They just are memorizing it. And then in the dialectic stage, when they're asking the questions, you go through and you hang more information on those pegs. So now we're categorizing all of this information. And then as they start to grow, they go from dialectic to what is known as the rhetoric stage. And they start taking that information and they start analyzing it, and they make connections with these different subjects. And their job is to figure out, how does this work with each other? And they go from having a good basic comprehension of how it works to getting a deeper understanding, to where they can now express themselves using this information and be able to figure out how to teach other people, how to use it in their real life situations. It's a mastery level of it. So, by the way, I don't know that I have seen any public school system that actually goes from dialectic into rhetoric. I think some advanced classes I had, like in honors English and that kind of thing, that we did get into more rhetoric level discussions, but they weren't necessarily all that great. At least not compared to the stuff that I'm dealing with now in our literature. Anyway, so with grammar level, that is knowledge. We're gaining knowledge. And knowledge is just, the bare facts. You can be very knowledgeable, but not really understand the information well. And then with the dialectic, we go into more understanding. And you can understand it and how it works, but you won't be able to necessarily express that knowledge very intelligently. It's, usually very difficult process of figuring out how to express yourself and what you know. But wisdom is that moment when you're able to know the grammar, you know all of the verbiage, and you know how it works. You have that deeper understanding, and then you can appropriately express yourself and use this knowledge in real life situations and be able to teach other people. Um, so that I really was like this moment in my mind when I started homeschooling the kids. I was like, oh, this is Proverbs all over again. When you read the first chapter of Proverbs, you can start seeing this theme going through it about knowledge, understanding, wisdom, and its progression. Anyways, so it's good stuff. I highly encourage you to read it. So to get to this level of wisdom, we go through a cycle. So each year, you're going to go through a certain set of information in the classical education. And the next year, you'll go through another set. And the next year, you'll go through another set. Well, after that, usually you are at the next developmental stage, and you go back to the first set of information and you learn it more deeply. And then you go to the second set of information, you learn it more deeply. And then you go to the third set of information and you learn it more deeply. And so some programs you go through the same information 3 times, and some programs you'll go through it 4 times, to where you're cycling through this information. Another aspect of education that I learned, well, going through school was, you have lecture and lab. You have lecture where you sit down with the book and with your professor or teacher, and they're going through and they're teaching you things and you're taking notes, and you're learning it for your head knowledge to figure out how does this work. But then you go into lab and you have to take that head knowledge and use it in a practical way, to be able to fully get a good grasp on on this. What I have found is that in real life, God's my teacher and I'm a student. I always thought that when I was going through the same trials and tribulations over and over and over again, that it was because I wasn't getting the information the first time. And I found it really frustrating. Like, oh, if I would have figured this out, then I wouldn't be here doing this again. Oh, man, I thought I got it. Apparently, God thinks that I need more times going through this to really get it. And then when I started homeschooling and I learned about the spiral and all that, I was like, oh, it wasn't because I didn't get it the first time that I was sent back through that information. I'm going through it again to learn it deeper, to get a better understanding of what it was that I learned the first time, and to get more of a practical hands-on lesson this time than last time, or to master it enough to where I can actually start teaching other people. It blew my mind, and it relieved me so much, because I really felt like I was never getting it right. I was always failing the test. So the way I felt like. But that's not the way God works. He does care about us and our education, and he sends us through this spiral multiple times to help us get a better grasp on life, what he wants to teach us. I also realized that God was using themes in my life. There would be a theme. Some years I was focused in on who I was in God, who I was as a mom, who God is to me, what authority and submission look like. Like, there was always some sort of theme. Extended family, sometimes there was themes of them in my life. When was I going to have good boundaries, or when was I going to forgive and love and move forward in my relationships? It was quite incredible watching how God just maneuvered me in my life. It is. Even this past week, I've been experiencing it. It's amazing. So there was another realization that I had was that, okay, in education, we have the lecture and lab, like I was talking about. In real life, we have lecture and lab too. You're meant to read the Bible and then learn to live what you just experienced and learned about in lecture. You go to church and you sit in a sermon. You're I usually end up finding that something in my week has brought me back to that sermon, made me realize that I have to live what I just learned. There's a lecture in a lab, and it's your life. Your life is lab. You will never get away from lab. It is a part of your world. There's a part of me, I loved lab sometimes, but I broke a lot of test tubes and beakers, and I was a menace to my chemistry teacher. Sorry about that, by the way. But I mean, sometimes lab is messy and life is hard. And having to learn by living out what you read, what you heard, means that it's going to be painful and it's going to be messy. But the teacher's there to help, so you're not on your own. But tests are still a part of our life too. You will be tested, and that's when the teacher has to stay quiet while you're being tested. Are you going to remember what you learned? Are you going to lean on that knowledge that you were given and test well? I don't always test well. Sometimes I have to do the retake. A lot of times I have to do a retake. But he's a good teacher. He grades on a curve, by the way. When you're his, you get Jesus' test scores. So you get to keep trying. You don't have to worry about being rejected because your mediator took the test for you, the ultimate test for you. Now your job is to continually get up and try again, which is so relieving. Knowing that the ultimate test has been taken, I've already passed. But now I'm learning it for myself, learning how to live as Jesus lived, to be just like him. That's a good end goal to have. I want to know what Jesus knows. I'll never attain that here in this life, but it's a very high standard that I'm going towards, to get to look just like Jesus, to please God the way that Jesus did and does. My goal when raising my children is to help them plan their education to be of a higher purpose than just to get a job. A career will never fulfill them. They will find themselves disappointed because careers, they can be fulfilling in their own right, but they will not give you meaning and purpose in your life. Not in the way that you're called to. You're called to a higher purpose, a higher standard of living. So I want my kids to not just want to get from one day to the next, but to create something, to express themselves, to create something beautiful, and to find joy in their lives in that way. This is the purpose of education, is to bring about joy, to help you move through life in a way that you're not constantly grinning and bearing the pain. There are seasons where it's painful and it's not easy, but just learning how to work, how to live in this life, learning some skills can really just make your life so much more enjoyable. So, thanks for joining me.